Hi, folks. This is Sean Conroy. I'm here with Andy Secunda. Hi, Andy.
I don't want you to introduce me at the top of the show. Then
Welcome,
it's like
Andy. Thanks for being here.
This is our joint show, Sean. I'm Andrew Secunda.
It feels like you're a little insecure about your role here.
I am when you present me as though I'm guesting on the show.
So great you could show up for this.
This is both of our shows.
There's only one show.
But this one show belongs to both of us.
It does. You're absolutely correct. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Co-Pilots. I am Sean Conroy.
And I'm Andy Secunda.
On this podcast, we talk about TV pilots, the first episodes of television shows. Sometimes pilots become long-running series. Others don't make it past that first episode.
We're going to talk about all of them. The great pilots, the bad pilots, the weird pilots, the forgotten pilots. We are TV writers, but it should be noted that we are the dumbest TV writers you know, so all of these are just our dumb opinions.
So dumb. Welcome to the show. Today we're going to first start by wishing Andy a happy birthday here on the show. This will come out in 6 months when that'll be totally irrelevant, but...
Yeah, I'm going to get a lot of happy birthdays in October 25.
Right. Did you have a nice birthday?
I never have a nice birthday. It's always disappointing.
What did you do for your birthday?
I did a lot of nice things, but it's basically just to fend off the darkness.
What's the darkness?
I don't know, in my brain, in the cobwebs of my soul.
And that's different on the birthday than it is on other days?
It's similar to other days, but it's more acute. And, I think it's appropriate to start any television podcast with a deep exploration of why you have the emotional problems that you do. But I can't say it's various things I'm working through. But you know what? The answer is I had enough food to numb out of sugary and carb-dependent treats that I got through it okay.
Happy to hear it. I mean, sorry. Well, whatever. All right. We are here, as we are every episode, to talk about a pilot. And today's pilot is called Mr. and Mrs. Dracula. And the name is a little bit of a giveaway that it is about a vampire couple.
Family, if you will. But yes, it is. Those are the...
Well, I say vampire couple because the children, I don't think, are actually vampires. Right?
Yeah.
But before we get into that, let's just talk for a moment about what was going on when this show aired, which did make it to air, even though we never got to a second episode.
No, and we've had to sort of hypothesize that because in watching it on YouTube, it has the commercials and...
right, it's recorded off somebody's VCR.
Right.
And by the way, the end of it is a Star Wars ad for immunizing children. So apparently George Lucas is in on this whole thing of putting, tracers inside people's bodies and monitoring people and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, Sean is deeply anti-vax. We represent all different perspectives on this show, but you just know that's going to affect his read on every show we cover.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so much to get into around that. But before we get into all that, or separately from that, just to give you some idea of what was going on in September of 1980, the number one song at that time was Upside Down by Diana Ross.
Sure.
The number one film was Empire Strikes Back. Again, George Lucas in on the whole, made billions from Big Pharma.
Did you know this before? And now you're looking back on the Star Wars films and you're like, I don't know if I'm on board anymore.
Yeah. I feel like, when somebody is that diabolical behind stuff, I feel like my childhood has been ripped in half.
And can we have just a few bars of Upside Down, Sean?
Upside down. Boy, you turn me
all right
inside. I think there was a debate about whether they should call it Upside Down or Inside Out.
Oh, really?
Inside Out.
Even though both are in the song, it's like, which is going to sell it better?
And I think Upside Down was the right choice because Inside Out is sort of sickening to think about.
Yeah.
You turn me inside out. All of a sudden, I'm picturing
the fly.
Organs on the outside of the body.
Right.
Yeah.
Jeff Goldblum and the Fly.
Right.
Spoilers. Sorry.
It's a spoiler that Jeff Goldblum was in The Fly?
Well, I don't know, the scene where something horrible happens.
Also in apartments.com. Number one TV show at the time was Dallas. Yeah. I don't remember where they were in the sequence about who shot JR, who's going to shoot JR, who's, JR got shot. There was something in that area in 1980.
Remember when JR got shot? There was that season.
That was, of course, the year that the USA beat the USSR in the Olympics. Although...
Is it the Miracle on Ice?
The Miracle on Ice, but they didn't beat them in the finals, right? Wasn't the final game against somebody else? Maybe Czechoslovakia?
And this year they did beat them in the finals.
This year?
Is that what you're in the year we're in, 1980?
No, I'm saying in 1980 it was the Miracle on Ice, but it wasn't. They didn't beat the USSR in the last game in the gold medal game.
It was just that they had not been beaten.
They won all their games, and I think they beat the USSR along the way, but they didn't win against them in the final game. Kevin? Can you look that up, because I want to.
But we are such a spiteful nation that just to beat the USSR didn't even matter.
It was in the quarterfinals or something like that. And then it became, we beat the Russians.
It's weird that the coach's speech was so much centered on, we have to beat the Russians. I do not expect us
Coach,
to take
we're playing Czechoslovakia.
I understand, but remember, the Russians are the most important.
We beat the Russians last week.
I just want you to all remember that last week we beat the Russians.
Yeah, but who are we playing today, Coach?
I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's
the Finns.
The Finns?
Yeah.
And they lost.
They won.
Oh, they won the whole thing.
They won the gold against Finland, but the final game in which we beat out the Russians for the gold medal,
Yes.
and the Russians got the silver,
Yeah.
we played Finland in.
Got it.
It was somehow this weird,
A terrible end to a movie.
yeah.
And we all skated up to the Russians who were in the stands watching.
Do you remember that the coach, I don't know how true this was, but I think it was in the movie, that he said to, I think it was Mike Eruzione, who was a goalie. He was like, when I yell at you and call you Eruzione, that's because I'm yelling at the entire team. But when I call you Mike, that's definitely I'm just yelling at you.
I'm going to do that with you.
You're going to call me by my last name and be yelling at everybody?
Yes. And when I call you Conroy, I'm yelling.
Conroy, why are you destroying the environment?
I'm yelling at both you and Kevin, our producer.
Yeah.
When I call you Sean, it's just you.
Okay. And I could be getting wrong what position. I think Eruzione was not a goalie. I mean, look, it's over 40 years ago, so how am I supposed to remember this stuff? Although I do remember where I was for that game. Against Finland, in which we beat the Russians. So anyway, this pilot is about Mr. and Mrs. Dracula. And basically it's the story of how these vampires move from Transylvania to the Bronx to figure out a new life for themselves.
The classic gothic horror story.
As a sitcom.
As a sitcom, yes. And what I do love about it is, and I guess it's been done occasionally over time, but this is definitely a time when they had much more confidence in just having the show be named exactly what it is. It's a show about Mr. and Mrs. Dracula. That's it.
But wouldn't they then name it Mr. and Mrs. Dracula Move to the Bronx?
I feel like it's implied that this isn't going to be your average Dracula story, guys.
Mr. and Mrs. Dracula Stay Home. Okay, so let's get into the pilot. It starts in Transylvania.
Before we do...
Oh, fuck me. Go ahead.
If we can go back to the Miracle on Ice.
Secunda! Why are you doing this?
That's me yelling at you too, Kevin. The thing to me that is one of the most interesting aspects of it is the casting of Dick Shawn. This is a film that is deeply tied to this pilot, although I believe in no direct fashion, other than it was obviously influenced by it, which is Love at First Bite, which was a George Hamilton vehicle wherein he played Dracula, also coming to the United States.
A comedy.
A comedy, very broad comedy. Dick Shawn is also in that as a police lieutenant. And it's interesting because that's a film that I'm very familiar with and watched many, many times, because I think it was one of those HBO movies that they would play again and again.
Right. Like I didn't even have HBO, and I feel like I still saw that movie at some point because I was at somebody's house when it came on or something.
And that came out in 1979. And I don't know if...
That was the year the USA lost to the Russians.
It's when they had the salt in the wound. They're like, someday we're going to come back and beat this team in an earlier round.
Good luck, comrade. You will be playing Finland.
We will probably not even be in the arena, but we will feel your sting. So it's very interesting to me that they went, clearly they knew of Love at First Bite. They were doing this pilot, built on it. they couldn't get George Hamilton, or maybe it was just a legal perspective of like, that's too close. But that Dick Shawn, what a funny guy.
What about the police lieutenant as a vampire?
No, Dick Shawn is a very, he was a real character-y actor.
He was a comedian.
Yes, he was a comedian.
I mean, he was literally a stand-up.
Yes, and I think he did some one-man shows. I actually just watched him doing a Carson set, and at the beginning of it, he really has me. I think it was from '86, and I was like, this guy's great. This doesn't seem dated at all. And he's doing things like after his joke does well, he'll bow, which is really funny. And then at a certain point, it's just like, oh, now you can feel the datedness. And he's sort of saying, Pee Wee Herman wouldn't, he couldn't be a brain doctor. And it's just sort of odd.
Pee Wee Herman couldn't be a brain doctor?
Yes. It's like the comedians today. And it's just kind of very sort of shifting into old man comedy.
Which, by the way, feels relevant to Mr. and Mrs. Dracula.
Very much so.
Like almost Borscht Belt
very much so.
moments. I mean, we'll get to that. But.
Yes. And he's also, most well known probably is, I would guess, he was Mad Mad World, one of the many
producers.
Comedians. And the producers as LSD is probably his biggest claim to fame as far as I know him. And then the other interesting thing, just to stack this, is that there were two versions of this pilot, exactly the same pilot. I don't know, is Dick Shawn, do we know whether Dick Shawn was, I think he was the lead in the other one too. We only had access to
the first one,
which had Carol Lawrence as Sonia, and then Paula Prentice, I believe, plays the
so
mother
the second
in
pilot
one.
was exactly the same as the first one, except they replaced the wife.
Because
that was the problem.
I don't know if it's exactly the same, but I know that is one of the big changes that they had. And yes, I agree. And it's like Paul Prentice, I have to assume if it's true today, it was true then, is a bigger name. And I think, maybe more of a hot number. I don't know that they were like, oh, I got to get
hot number.
Yeah, I got to get a little more sex appeal. I have no idea what their reasoning is. I thought Carol Lawrence did a fine job in this. And, only had sort of smaller parts. So I don't know what the reason is.
But she wasn't such a hot number.
Yeah, who knows? I also like to get in the mindset of an old style comedy writer by using terms like hot number.
Oh, that Carol Lawrence. She ain't no real tomato.
But yeah, I mean, that's a huge question. And again, another reason why I would love to see that second pilot, to see what did you think that Paul Prentice was going to solve in this? Or what were your other changes? They were like, oh, we were so close, but we can't give up on this. Mm-hmm. This is ready to go. Because there's no way that they corrected the things that have to have been the biggest problem with watching today, which are the deeply problematic issues in the second act of this thing. But anyway, those are my big questions, and I would love to know, and we don't know, like, what are the connections to Love at First Bite, and what led from one pilot to the second?
Can we get George Hamilton on the show to answer those things?
That would be great, and I have a feeling he would go, I don't know. They never made me that offer. That's my George Hamilton impression.
Well, let's talk about the pilot.
Let's do it.
We start, as all great vampire dramas do, some of the great vampire comedies, in Transylvania.
Yes, which is also how Love at First Bite starts.
The home of Dracula. And they're having a problem because the villagers are coming for them.
Right.
So they need to move. They need to find somewhere else to live.
And they're starting off with immediate, what we would call in the business, clammy jokes. Like, the Dracula family's lived in this castle for thousands and thousands of years. It's almost paid for. And they're saying they're not going to leave. It's tradition. Nothing will make me leave. And the kid says, Dracula's son says, they started to break through the gates. Well, so much for tradition. Just immediate reversals like that.
Yeah.
Just very confident.
And along the same lines, he drinks blood from a goblet or something and says, here's blood in your eye.
Yes.
And that's the whole joke, is that it's not mud, I guess.
And that is one of my biggest questions, which is, all right, yeah, you're going to go for the big, easy, every blood pun you can, every Dracula pun you can. What are you doing in episode 2?
Right.
Like, are you really getting into the deep character stuff after that? Like, what is your plan?
I also always look at the first scene of the show, and this is not anything amazing on my part, but I'm like, this is the scene that's supposed to hook everybody for the show. So we're watching this show and we're going, oh, they're doing basically puns from a joke book. That's the level of writing here. Do I want to sit here and watch that? Now, obviously, there was less competition back then. It was like, do I want to watch this or do I want to get up and get a snack and wait till Dallas comes on?
Right.
But it just did not blow me away. It was also funny because there's 4 characters in the scene.
Yeah.
And he basically has all the dialogue the whole time.
Right.
I mean,
the wife barely has any
The son
lines.
speaks for a moment.
Right.
I don't think the wife says anything in the first scene.
You may be right. And in terms of to your point about it feeling Borscht Belt, they are clearly coded Jewish.
Right.
Which I guess is a reasonable comedic choice. But really where you get into the weird parts, just to sort of flash forward a little bit, is when they have stuff like...
The kid is about to have his bar mitzvah, basically.
Right, to become a vampire.
Yeah.
It's just like there's some logic problems. And later there's a joke about locks.
Right. That's the big gift he gets her for their anniversary is a half a pound of locks.
Right.
Which does not make sense if you're a vampire.
Well, this is the thing. And then later when they're at dinner, they're asking for caviar. So is the idea that she is not a vampire?
Maybe.
And the kids aren't vampires. The boy will become a vampire. He establishes that the daughter will... No, the women do not become... Or little girls don't become daughters, only sons. Is that distinguished? But it's like, you only have mortal families?
But she says they've been married for 618 years.
So she's a vampire.
I don't know, but she's immortal in some way. Or maybe she's just older than she looks.
She's just very well preserved.
Yeah.
That it's like the usual problem of studio and network interference is you really got to have them explain everything and let's leave nothing to chance. And then it's a bunch of exposition. And that's the thing we harp on again and again. That's always sort of a problem. And it's nicer if they can get it in subtly. This is a situation where it's such a complicated setup, even though it should be very simple from after Mr. and Mrs. Dracula, that then you're parsing who's a vampire and who's not a vampire, even though some of them have vampire powers and some don't. So you're talking about like an honorary title, and I absolutely need some explanation for us to move forward on this.
Right. Not to mention they have a bat who lives with them.
Right.
Who is not a vampire but speaks.
Gregor.
Yes.
Yes. And that's another thing that's like, okay, you're doing a puppet. That's a bat.
All that was a puppet?
I don't think it was a real bat, Sean.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I guess it's possible that they trained a bat to speak. Or do you mean it's just maybe a real bat, then they dubbed over the words?
I didn't think about that. That would make more sense.
You really were swept away in this.
Yeah.
You're very immersed in the pilot. Sean doesn't
I thought
look
Gregor was amazing.
but exactly to what you're saying, it's just like, why... Okay, it's a puppet, but he speaks. What do you do? What's going on?
On top of which, and I know this is like getting too into the weeds, maybe, but
or the coffins.
The coffins.
I did it.
Sure, but the parents both have clear Transylvanian accents.
Right.
The father's is better than the mother's, but they both have accents.
Right.
The kids do not.
I would go so far as to say that the kids have New York accents.
Yeah.
A little girl, Mina, says something like when they're talking about what she should wear to school or whatever. She's like, I'm the only one that wears a shroud. Like, what the F? And let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Do you feel like at the time, this is my sense, many kids were on TV, which, is mostly shot in LA, are sort of New York kids. And I wonder if it's like those are the ones that came from theater, so they had more training, and so they're the ones that broke through. Because I feel like a lot of TV kids have those weird, sneaky, particularly from the 70s.
New York accents?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would have to go back and look at...
That's Secunda's take.
Old pilots. And
that's a segment called Secunda's take.
Take an accent class.
Yeah.
But anyway, so then we get to the credit sequence, and this is another one where I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Because the credit sequence is them at the airport, the kids, and I think there was a grandmother. Am I wrong about that?
I think that's like a Transylvanian at the
servant.
airport.
She's like their familiar or something.
Oh, is she with them?
I thought she was.
We don't see her again, do we?
No.
I thought that she was just a person at the airport, although you raised the question of it seems like they're receiving their luggage. So it would be them in New York, unless this is a... No, but if it was...
I think it was supposed to be them at...
It's not a layover because
I
then
would
they
presume it's JFK because that's the international airport in New York.
So then I wonder if this is just a miscommunication amongst production, because she clearly seems to be dressed not like a regular American grandmother type, but more of a Romanian grandmother, Transylvanian in this case.
Some kind of alien.
Yes.
But also I was like, why are they there to receive their parents in coffins at the airport?
Well, this again points to, are the kids at this point human?
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, either the boy or both of them are going to be turned into vampires, but the girl is not going to be called a vampire.
So you're saying that the kids would be human because they were at the airport to receive the parents, meaning it must be daytime so the parents can't just come off the plane, right?
But of course, then the coffins open
and out come the parents.
Right.
So it was very confusing. Also, where was Gregor?
Another important question.
Yeah.
Maybe he flew, but that's a very long way for a bat to fly.
It's a long way for anybody to fly.
It's true. There are a lot of logic questions, and I feel like they did not care about these logic questions.
No, because they had Dick Shawn, the money.
This guy was LSD in the producers a long time ago, even when they made this.
Anyway, so then we come up on them in their apartment, and now we know they're in the Bronx because they have comedian Rick Avila's there with a boombox in their apartment for some reason.
You're right. There's another thing they don't. It's fascinating how far they have to go to not establish things to make two TV writers go, oh, they really should have spent a little time establishing
I can't
this.
stand exposition. And yet I was like, who is that guy?
I see again. My headcanon, as we would call it in the geek world, was that he was the super.
Of course.
But it's never stated, and he doesn't even do anything that would imply he's just listening to his boombox.
He dances and listens to music and then makes a couple of like double takes at weird things,
which makes it confusing about whether he knows they're vampires or not.
Right.
And then, I'm taking he doesn't. He comments on the kid's clothes. And how if he doesn't change his fancy boy clothes, then he's going to end up...
He shouldn't go out in the Bronx.
No, he's going to end up in his birthday suit, is what Rick Avila's. Rick
Oh.
Avila's... I'm curious what you know him from, because I know him primarily from Cannonball Run.
I don't really know him at all, except that I was watching just the other night. I think it was a Showtime series, documentary series about the Comedy Store, and I feel like they mentioned his name a couple of times, but I don't know that they even showed him. So when he showed up, I was like, I could be totally wrong, but I think that's where I had just heard his name in the last couple of days.
There are certain character actors like him, because he was also in Ghost.
That was his biggest thing, right?
Yes. He was also in Godfather.
Aside from Mr. and Mrs. Dracula.
But yeah, of course, that was his biggest thing, yes. It's interesting that this didn't make him break wider. And the other thing he's in is Godfather 3, and what I might argue is the best scene, where Bridget Fonda and Andy Garcia are, canoodling, to throw in another old-timey word, and then these killers break in
a New York Post 1980 kind of
right.
gossip column.
I used
word.
to write for a gossip rag. I don't know if you guys know that about me.
You and Cindy Adams were tight.
We actually went head-to-head a lot.
Liz Smith can go fuck herself.
And there's just a great scene with the hostage situation, and it's an amazing performance, and he's one of those guys that's like so characteristic, just his look and his manner, and he was a great actor, and it's kind of feel bad. He passed away in 95. That was when I looked up, I was like, how come this guy didn't do more character work later on? And that was the reason. But it's just a really fine character actor, and one of those guys who, even though it's only a few things, I remember him clearly in each thing, which is a sign of somebody who's really nailing it.
Right.
I mean,
like Tom Hanks, Tom
Hanks more above the title, Sean. He's a big star.
I'm just saying he's a stand-up too.
No, I think you're thinking of was it called Stand Up? What was the name of the Sally Field movie?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Standing Up. No, that wasn't it.
Anyway,
John
I saw
Goodman
him.
as the
I saw him at
husband.
a club once, and he was fantastic.
Rick Avilas?
Tom Hanks. Yeah.
Punchline. That was the other obvious title.
No, it wasn't the punchline.
No, Sean. You didn't really see him, did you?
I mean, it was on screen, but he was in a club.
That's a movie.
Whatever. Anyway, so Rick Avilas is there. He leaves. Never says who he is or what he's doing there. He's just there, I guess, to establish that it's the Bronx.
Yes, change of place, and I think probably also just the pilot thing, and I think this is why Cousin Anton's in it also, to be like, but who are the wacky characters that are going to populate this world? And I'm assuming Puerto Rican superintendent is going to be one of the major characters,
and they're going to have to keep the secret from him or whatever.
Right. Although they don't, I wouldn't even say they don't seem that interested. They seem completely unfazed. It doesn't hit their radar that they have to hide what they are.
Right. Nobody's going to know.
Which is a fascinating...
Well, the Bronx is such a melting pot,
Is that what it is? Yeah. Well, I would really love to, because I used to watch both Love at First Bite and George Hamilton's other, big movie at the time, which was Zorro the Gay Blade, which was, I have to assume, just without question, deeply problematic. I know that there were scenes in Love at First Bite wherein George Hamilton is in a black church in Harlem because his coffin's shipped to the wrong place, and he opens it, and the parishioners freak out and run away. I think Sherman Hemsley, is the reverend in that. And there were other problematic things in that movie, but I don't remember them being particularly out of the ordinary.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then we ramble through an entire scene with no clear idea of where the scene is going, which is about a variety of things, including Saturday is our anniversary. I hope he does something special for me, says Mrs. Dracula. The daughter wants to go see the Grateful Dead in concert, which Dracula may allow.
And interestingly, on that joke, says, like, I'm not going to let you see a rock concert. And she goes, but it's the Grateful Dead. And he goes, And there's a huge applause break. Mm-hmm. And then he has the sort of button and like, our kind of people. But I have to assume in that moment with the applause break that Robert Klain, the writer, and the other executive must have been like, we got a hot one here. This one is, this is it. This is going to go the distance.
So you think that was a real applause break from the audience?
You think it might have just been canned? That's so bold if they're like, this needs more juice. Like, this deserves...
I just can't imagine what people would be applauding there.
I think it's just such an obvious, like, Dracula likes the Grateful Dead.
No, I get it, but I don't know that somebody in real life would go, you know what? Bravo.
Right.
So I felt like probably that was not real.
That's fair.
But what do I know?
I mean, this is why we need Dick Shawn on the show. I'm sure he's still around.
He's doing a roast for George Burns next week. So it's their 618th anniversary.
Yes.
Again, either she's very old and looks great, or she's some other type of immortal, or she's a vampire by proxy or something.
Maybe these are all the things that they fixed when they went back and did the pilot again. So, wait a minute, we didn't establish any of these things. We need a lot of exposition in this.
I can't remember which one of them says they want locks for their anniversary.
I think he's asking Gregor, what should he get her? And Gregor's like, locks.
Right. Which I was like, what is happening right now? How does this make any... And again, it's the thing you were saying before of like, it's like old school, almost like Borscht Belt comedy.
Right.
Of, it doesn't make sense with a vampire, but this would kill in the Catskills.
Right.
So
quality of the joke trumps the entire concept we're building.
Because I guess the joke is, how funny would it be to get somebody locks for their anniversary?
Is that yes, I guess that is the joke.
Like, it's ridiculous to get somebody smoked fish.
See, I feel like, well, maybe this is just
smoked, right? Is it smoked?
Some of it's smoked. The problem that I have is, not the problem, the way I'm interpreting that joke is, it's funny because this bat with a Transylvanian accent is saying locks as his suggestion. this very sort of pedestrian Jewish brunch food. Yet you're also correct, which is there's a joke on a joke because it's also...
Who would give someone lox for their anniversary?
And then it's a joke on a joke on a joke because his issue is that it's so expensive. And then it's a quadruple joke on a joke. It's really not a joke on a joke. This is just into logic problems because it's like, why is a vampire going to want lox anyway?
It's also a quintuple joke on a joke because the 618th anniversary is the whitefish anniversary.
Well, then maybe this is the whole joke that they were trying to get to.
Right.
Maybe they reverse engineered from that piece of information.
Right. So then he, classic visual gag, pulls out the Murphy coffins.
Right.
From the wall.
Which, again, a further logic question. You assume that those Murphy coffins... Those Murphy coffins are Mr. and Mrs. Dracula's
sleeping
coffins.
Places, yes.
And yet when she's angry at him later, she basically implies you're sleeping on what is the equivalent to the couch, which is the coffins, and she's going to sleep in the bedroom. But it's like, well, if she's a vampire, how is she sleeping in the bedroom?
Very confusing.
Unless it's like, a near dark situation, Catherine Bigelow film where they sort of, paste up the windows with garbage bags or something.
Which is not unusual in vampire things, I think, right?
No, you think that was what their reasoning was, and they just...
I think they didn't give a fuck.
I think you're absolutely right.
I think they did not care.
But it's like, that's such a... Even as you're setting up the show, to be like, okay, well, budgetarily, we can't go into the bedroom. We don't want to build that, so why don't we just have them pull the Murphy bed out here? But then also, we're not going to change that she's making him sleep on these things that are clearly where they sleep.
Bob, we got a lot of problems to fix for next year's version of the pilot.
Oh, yeah, that is what it is. I guarantee you that stayed exactly the same.
So that's the big end of the act, is that she's mad at him.
Yeah.
And storms out to go to the bedroom where she can sleep and be disintegrated by the rays of the sun or whatever.
Unless she's near darking it.
Right. Then we come back to, I guess I'm leaving out an important detail, which is he admits to Gregor, first of all, he has a job at a hospital somehow.
They drop it casually.
And they never explain what he does there.
No.
Although he's somehow involved with transfusions.
Yes. And the issue was that he was doing the thing that would be the only reason a vampire would work at a hospital, which is he was drinking blood. And that's why he gets fired.
Right.
And so they drop this, and you're immediately thinking, oh, I guess so he can be drinking blood. And then they walk their way back to it as a big punchline.
Right.
That's issue number one. Issue number two is they bring everything to a halt to have him kind of have a somber moment of like, I'm just sort of quietly avoiding talking about this because there's clearly some story point that I don't want to get to yet. And that's like, what's going on? And then when they get back to it, it's like, yeah, he's a vampire. He wanted to work there for the thing.
There's also, in my mind, there's such a much more interesting version of the pilot. Like, why don't we see him at the hospital? Why don't we see him lose his job at the hospital? Why don't we see him looking for a job and failing at that?
Yeah.
Any
of these things. Or, even better, they've moved to America. And actually, I think this was more of a plot in Love at First Bite. Because in Love at First Bite, I think Hamilton has problems finding people to bite. And so he has to bite a wino, and then he gets drunk, which is, again, a billion times. It's not even offensive, but it's like the version of that in this is crazy. It's not out of necessity. There's no question that he can find whoever he wants to bite in this. Mm-hmm. It would be much more of an issue of, now that he's in America, he doesn't have his system all set up of who he's going to bite and how his family's going to survive. Even though, again, it's unclear whether anybody else has to bite anybody.
Right.
So, yes, that would also be another plot that they should have explored.
Right. But instead, he's been looking for a job for a week. He doesn't have a job. He needs money to celebrate his anniversary with his wife to get her locks. And we're out of the first scene, which is also the first act, basically.
Right. That was more typical in that period of time. And a multicam, which was another question. And I guess the answer is always budgetary. But you're clearly going for kind of a Munsters, kind of an Addams Family thing, which had preceded this show by many years, both of them. Why do this as a multicam?
Yeah.
It opens it up so much. You can do so many other bits and so many more effects and
have more fun.
Yeah. And build the world and answer questions that are the problems
Well,
here.
and I know what you're saying about how that was done more commonly back then with multicams, where it was just all one long scene. But I feel like even when you watch old shows like that, there's clear delineation between this is the A story, this is the B story, this is the C story within those long scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And in this one, it felt to me, and maybe it was just me, but it felt to me like they were just kind of rambling through it. Like,
definitely.
there was no focus on anything that was important.
And I tend to always emotionally side with comedy writers that are just like, well, this is how I want to make it the funniest thing. So I'm not going to worry as much about a very sharp delineation of A story, B story, all that stuff. You really feel it here. It's all over the place.
Mess.
It's a mess.
Yeah.
You're following. Part of the problem is the jokes aren't funny, but independent of that, it's so weirdly. It's just such a mishmash of.
I was sitting here going, "What am I supposed to be watching right now? What am I paying attention to?"
Right. What am I emotionally following?
Right. And then we come back to a scene where he's out at a bar. Why did he go to the bar? Was he looking for? He was looking for that
his
vampire or something.
His cousin Anton.
Oh, okay. So
who
that
works at the bar.
Oh, so that was cousin Anton. I didn't
Yes.
remember that's who that was.
And I'm not sure if that was to find other work or it was to
Borrow money.
Is Anton the one that suggests to him he can hawk his?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So yeah. So I guess it's just to figure out his financial situation.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, it's sort of like you're Count Dracula. You have a castle. One assumes that you've been royalty for a long time.
I also feel like a very small deposit accruing interest over 618 years, he's going to end up with quite a bit of money.
You would think.
It's like those old commercials where they'd be like, if you drink this cola for 3,000 years, you'll be able to afford this yacht. You know, it's over time, it's going to get you some money, and somehow he's completely broke.
Yeah.
Felt bad for him.
I mean, maybe that's what they're going for. Maybe we're just supposed to be like, oh, he didn't handle
sympathy,
his investments correctly.
Right. Also, who knows if he got involved with Bernie Madoff or whatever. You know.
This predated that.
But he walks into this bar. He sees two attractive women who think he looks weird.
Hot numbers, if you will.
Some real tomatoes.
I mean, they're no Paul Prentice, but
no. And then he meets an African-American man at the bar, the whole joke of which to me seems to be using slang that he misunderstands.
Correct.
Like, give me five what? Brother, I'm not your brother. Like,
right.
There's just a whole list of stuff that he doesn't quite process.
Right. And the outfit that they dress this gentleman in.
Yes.
Which is... would we go as far as to say a bright red zoot suit? How would you describe that?
It's certainly bright red. I think the crotch on the pants might have to be lower for it to be a zoot suit.
That's fair.
But there is a feather in the hat, right?
Yes. Say like a pimp bot without the bot quality.
Right. Yeah. It's like a Halloween pimp costume.
Right.
Basically.
Yes. That's a good way of describing it. And that is also how they are portraying this character, again, in very old school comedy stylings fashion. So it's already out of the gate offensive. I would guess even for 1980. I concur that certainly there would have been infinitely less awareness.
Right.
But it feels like it would have been dated even for that time. There were it's not like there were no well-written, intelligent, well-drawn black characters in American media up to that time.
Right.
So this is just a crazy, and
it's like a cartoon character from 20 years before shows up in the show.
Correct. And as I said, even in Love at First Bite, although there are probably things that are offensive in that and broadly drawn stereotypical characterizations also, at least it feels like they're sort of placing them in their own reality and not in this other reality that's just meant to set up Dick Shawn doing what he does next.
Yeah. So he goes after this guy because the guy wants his cape and will not leave him alone.
Right.
Because that's what happens when you go out to a bar. You try to take items of clothing from another person.
Of course.
And if they don't give it to you, you do not relent.
Right.
So this
and it's a really rough jazz club in the Greenwich Village.
You know, the kind of rough place where two gorgeous blondes stand by the door. And so because this guy is so pushy about taking Count Dracula's cape,
right?
Count Dracula drinks his blood,
right?
Which gives Dick Shawn the opportunity to be influenced by this guy's blood enough to do a stereotypical black accent at that point.
Now, what I would love to know is whether it must have been part of his act at some point.
That's what I assumed.
And they're like, we have to let Dick do his thing. I mean,
let Dick be Dick.
I mean, you got a home run hitter. He bats cleanup. Come on, guys.
Right.
So it's just astounding. A, that they do it. B, that there is really no other joke other than
he's talking that way.
Yes. And then
there's no jokes. It's just the accent.
Yes. And it's like you set up this other stereotype and then you're having Dick Shawn do an impression of the stereotype that you've set up. And then the third thing that astounds me is it's crazy how long it goes on.
I couldn't believe it. Here's one more thing that I thought was bizarre.
Yeah.
The first thing he says after he drinks this guy's blood is he says, I've never tried soul food before.
Right.
Which is just weird. Like there's so many logic difficulties with that on top of the offensiveness of it.
Yes. And of course the logic difficulty of, so every time you drink someone's blood, you absorb, I guess that's a good setup for someone who's a character guy. He's just going to do an impression of whoever the person is. Although something tells me almost without question in my mind that they'll only do that when they want to do it. When they'll
only do
some ethnicity that they want to.
Right.
They're going to drop that aspect of drinking blood whenever they want to.
Episode 2, he drinks Hitler's blood.
Why is Hitler there?
Because he ran away from Argentina.
Well, all right. Well, you actually justified that in an instant. A billion times more than anything in this pilot is justified.
So then he has to go talk to Cousin Anton,
right,
about how to get money. And that's when Cousin Anton suggests hawking the violin. But also Cousin Anton says, please don't tell anybody I'm a vampire. I haven't told anybody I'm a vampire. And
which is about the only pipe that they even lay in this piping plot that you're setting up for future plot, or laying the groundwork for future plot. That's the only pipe they really lay down. It was oddly a welcome relief of like, oh, he's a vampire. He's hiding that he's a vampire.
Right. But then Count Dracula says, so you're a closeted vampire.
Oh, of course.
And I was like, oh, so they're going for, they didn't go any further than that, but it was like an oblique reference to homosexuality in a way.
Yo, it's without question. I mean, doesn't he? I mean, it's. I don't even know if it's oblique because he says, "Cool it with the vampire shtick." I haven't told anyone that I'm quote that way.
Right.
So it's instantly you're going from racially offensive to homophobic.
Yeah.
And that's the only joke.
At least he didn't drink somebody's blood and start talking like that, you know?
Yeah.
Although I guess we're past that at this point. It's like there's no coming back. So he decides he's going to hawk his violin, and that's how he's going to get money to get locks for his wife for their 618th anniversary. And we're out of that scene. So
thankfully,
there was no reason to have the Halloween pimp there or the blondes there except for the incredible comedy we got out of those people.
It really had the vibe of Robert Klane, who I don't even know. Did we cover his? So he started with Where's Papa, as a famous George Segal, directed by Carl Reiner film, sort of renowned, very New Yorky. And his biggest claim to fame is he wrote Weekend at Bernie's and then directed the sequel,
which was called
Back in Action. It's had to be some. Can you look that up? What the subtitle?
Longer Weekend at Bernie's.
Dead. What's a good dead pun? Let's guess.
Dead Reckoning.
Which are, it's a very broad, obviously ridiculous concept.
Dead period wait. WAIT.
I see. Anyway, so the thing I was going to say is that Robert Klein definitely, you can feel him pitching to people like, and then we do this bit and where Dick comes in and he's talking to this black guy.
It's great. I saw him do it in Vegas.
Yeah. And it's like, that's how he's pitching each scene, is just on the basis
the
of
comedic pieces.
Yeah, right.
Because there's no story.
No. There's no emotional content. There's no story.
Well, we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah. So then we're at the restaurant where they're celebrating their anniversary, right?
Right.
For some reason, the wife has converted her hairdo into a Bo Derek from 10 hairdo. She's got cornrows in her hair.
Yeah.
Didn't totally follow that. Was there a cut scene, maybe?
Yeah, another, like an even more offensive thing. And they weren't worried about it being offensive. They were just like, this doesn't play.
And then, of course, there's all again, just a bunch of, well, the first thing is they talk about the chicken. They're going to have chicken for dinner, but they can't believe it's cooked because vampires love raw meat, I guess.
It's so confusing.
And then
she wants the chicken.
Yeah.
He's also just sort of the bad improv scene aspect of, you're playing a vampire. You've gone into a restaurant.
Yeah.
You've clearly been in a restaurant before, but for some reason you're shocked.
Everything is shocking. You cook the food here?
It's like, so you've been to special vampire restaurants only in 600 years? Or more. That's only as long as they've been together. Who knows how long he's been alive.
He actually didn't become a vampire until 2 years after they got married. So 616 years. But yeah, so they have champagne. And then it's all puns or like weird. Some of it's puns and some of it's just weird vampire jokes. Like they work in that there's garlic on the chicken.
And that at least had potential. If they wanted to do like a thing, that's more of, I guess, a modern comment that would be about, hey, I have an allergy to garlic and you're not put it on.
Right.
Something like that. But I feel like even at the time,
You'll really upset the chef if you don't eat the garlic on the chicken.
Exactly. It just seems like it's a gimme to have them play out with the waiter. I'm sorry, that's the way it's prepared, whatever.
Right. We don't take special orders, sir. This is a very, very exclusive restaurant.
But instead they scale it up to garlic.
and then they also have steak, and he doesn't want to hear about that either. Because...
Right. And these are the kinds of things I'm just like, what are you doing from here? Right. Like...
Why are you being so cross? Please don't.
See, Sean, you would have done great on this show.
I
would have staffed you.
I would have been in the writer's room. And then we get to the crux of the whole story, the emotional heart of the story, the big moment where he gives her half a pound of lox. He's been able to afford it.
Mm-hmm. Which vampires love.
They love lox. Gregor knows. Where was Gregor this whole time, by the way? Why
not a dish known for its bloodiness, by the way.
Lox.
No.
Yeah. Almost the opposite, one might say. And she, in return for his anniversary, has made a case for his violin. So it basically turns into Gift of the Magi at that point.
Right.
Like, I cut my hair and I sold my watch. Like, instead it's, I hawked my violin, I made a case for your violin.
And I wonder what that, outside of the fact that it's like, well, I guess that's a dependable.
Oh, I guess that's what her hair was like that for or something? Did that have something to do with how she got the money to make no, I don't know.
Because she like sold her hair or something?
Maybe she just saw 10 and she was like, that's awesome. I want that.
She does have that monologue about 10.
Yeah.
Dudley Moore was so charming.
I love him. He's so short and British.
Very horny in that movie.
Yeah, it was such a, as I was watching it, I literally was sitting here going, are you fucking kidding me? This is Gift of the Magi? That's the best you got?
Yes. When they were like, well, we got to figure out something that happens. Wait a minute. I got it. Boss, I got it. Gift of the Magi.
You ever heard of O. Henry? Neither has anybody who watches this fucking garbage.
I guess it's just they're just saying this is what the show is going to be, so that when they're testing with people, like, well, what do you think's going to happen with the son? And they can go, I don't know. I guess he doesn't want to be a vampire, and the father wants him to be a vampire.
Okay with that, like
Right.
that we don't get into a lot of that story. We do know that those kids have stuff going on,
Right.
Like one would think that we'll see her with her friends, her in school, him
Right. She wants to be a vampire. The son doesn't want to be a vampire.
him rebelling against having to learn his Haftorah or whatever it's called in the vampire tradition.
Right.
You know, but it really blew my mind that was the end. Was I made this for you? I made this for you. Wah, 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 wah.
And that was it.
So I loved it. I thought it was great.
5 stars.
By the way, I think I forgot to mention this. That character, that African-American character who was dressed in the Halloween pimp costume,
Yes.
his character name in the credits is Bebop.
Oh, so maybe he was another character that they're going to bring in later.
Yeah.
Sounds like they're really world building.
Yeah.
I mean, this is kind of like an underworld level, world that they're, I mean, you definitely would have seen werewolves at some point because they would have run out of all the vampire puns. They would have had to get into dog puns with werewolves in episode 2.
So, yeah, that was the show. That was the pilot. That was the...
So good that they double dipped. They went back and stuck Paul Prentice in it.
So let me ask you this. Let's
Okay.
say you're there.
Okay.
It's 1980.
Uh-huh.
You're in the writer's room.
Sure.
The boss comes in and says, I got good news and bad news.
Yeah.
The good news is they may not pick up the show.
Okay.
The bad news is I still want it picked up. I need you to give me a story to pitch them for episode 2.
So they're handling it more streaming style, where they're asking for a second
Right after
episode.
they air right after they air the first episode,
or before.
we got
even,
4
to prove it.
days. We
Yeah.
got 4 days to put together a second episode.
Right.
So what's the story you pitch for the second episode?
I mean, right off the bat, the werewolf thing at least gives you more puns. You could also put a Frankenstein monster, although you're treading more. I guess any of these things you're treading on monsters territory.
Right, where there's a bunch of different monsters.
But see, I would establish immediately the blood thing.
Was there a werewolf in the Munsters?
Eddie Munster was a werewolf, I believe.
Right.
Yeah. Sort of weird bloodline there. The mother was a witch. Lily Munster was a
that
witch.
the one with Grandpa Al?
Yes, and he was a Dracula.
He was a vampire.
Yes.
First place I ever
Also coded Jewish.
first place I ever performed comedy was Grandpa Al's Shooting Stars
Oh, interesting.
in Yonkers, New York.
Did he appear?
No, he just owned the place,
Owned this
and it was named after him. He owned several restaurants and comedy clubs back at that time. This was in 1963.
I assume a lot of Grandpa Munster pictures on the wall.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
You gotta lead with your thing.
right. And I did a lot of Locke's humor back then.
Well, I mean, you have to. You have to.
This is my impression of me picking locks. I'll take that piece.
Nice.
Thank you.
I thought you were gonna do a picking locks pun.
I kind of did. I was picking.
Oh, you did it.
Yeah.
And then I made it just literal the whole way through.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. That's why people love this show.
I am pun blind. What people should know. I've said it in various other places, and this is the perfect example of it.
Right.
I only saw the one way and then said, oh, but it could be the other way of you actually picking the locks. I would not have lasted on Mr. and Mrs. Dracula.
But you would pitch the werewolf episode as episode 2.
I mean, the bar mitzvah comparison also feels like, I mean, you got to say they do set up the kids. So I guess I would go to the kids in episode 2.
Maybe the super.
The wife possibly saying, look, we don't have money. I need to get a job. And he's like, no vampire's wife has ever worked. And then, her sort of becoming more of a liberated woman in the new world. Because it does seem like that's the theme that they're going for, is like
Right.
old world, new world as emblematic, or symbolized by the vampire concept.
I would do an episode where they get caught by the villagers in the Bronx. and they get taken to
The Villagers being like the neighborhood, or you mean the Villagers from Transylvania?
the village people. And they get taken to the Throgsneck Bridge.
Yes.
And they're going to be executed on the bridge. They're going to be hung on the bridge.
Yes.
They get ropes put around their neck.
Uh-huh.
These people don't realize that you can't kill vampires by hanging, but they get dropped from the bridge.
This is very grim.
They fall into the water.
Uh-huh.
They swim down the river.
Right.
And
they build all this for the multicam set.
Right. They get back to their apartment.
Okay.
They get back to their coffins. And then they snap out of it, and they're still on the bridge about to be hung.
Oh, this is...
And at the end, you go, oh, it's just Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge.
Of
like
course.
It's, you know, because I think every episode should be...
Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge.
Another famous story.
Oh, I see. Another, I'd love it.
Gift of the Magi.
Right.
Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge.
Yeah.
There's another one where...
Casey at bat.
Yeah. They go to a baseball game, and Casey strikes out.
Sure.
There's another one where they're like, "Where is Gregor?" Ba-boom, ba-boom. It's just the telltale heart.
I mean, you definitely gotta dig into Gregor as your subplots a lot, and
right.
him wanting to, because that's definitely going to be a thing of like, you know, either the super, you know, tries to teach him how to break dance or whatever the thing
right.
is, and Gregor doesn't want to be tied to just being the family's bat. He wants to pop and lock.
I did enjoy that the super thought that Gregor was a parrot. Like, that was the one thing that I enjoyed in the whole show, I think.
Interesting. Just off of also your casual mentioning of the Village People, I wonder if it's like, you know, he's trying to look for work. He sees an audition for the Village People, and they're like, we should totally get a vampire.
Stunt casting.
And then it's him doing the songs with the Village People.
I love to stay at the YMCA.
I mean, to me, this is already a better show. And then he keeps biting the other Village People, and the manager is like, he's a great addition, but there's something weird about that guy.
The construction worker has disappeared. We don't know where he went. Well, that's it.
We did it.
That's the show.
Yep.
The end?
The end.
Tune in next time. Upside down, boy, you turn me inside out.